Okay, we're here with Kevin Abbott. What's the name of the brewery again?
We are Barrel of Monks Brewing.
Barrel of Monks Brewing. And where are you at? Out of?
Boca Raton, Florida.
Oh, really? Wow. How'd you end up in Montana? Just lucky, I guess.
We have some partners that do kind of importing for us, for the lack of a better word. They're just an import partner that kind of works compliance for several different states. And when we got kind of recommended to Georgia's distribution in Montana, and they seemed interested in our brands. So I actually have two brands, Barrel of Monks Brewing, and then I have a sour ale brewery called Odd Breed Wild Ales. So we got connected with George's, and we've done a couple orders there now, and they're good folks. They're really passionate about beer, and we're excited to be selling some beer in Montana.
Yeah, that's cool. Is Boca Raton, is that on the Miami side or on the Tampa side?
On the Miami side. It's about an hour north of Miami.
Is it cool? So how'd you end up in the beer business? What's your background? What's your background?
Well, it's funny you mentioned it because you mentioned being a wine guy primarily, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent 7 years as a wine steward at a really nice little Italian restaurant in Delray Beach, Florida, which is very close to Boca. And I was like 21, 22, just been in the restaurant business since I was 15. And I stumbled into a really fine dining Italian restaurant with an incredible wine selection. I mean, 700 bottles, complete verticals of Sassicaia and Ornellaia going back to 1995, 1993. And there was no one to take over the wine program when the sommelier left. And I said, well, I'll learn and I'll do it. So that's how I got my start in kind of spirits and specialty beverages. And I did that for 7 years. And I hired a new server, and he was a home brewer. And he told me, I'll make you a deal. You teach me about wine, I'll teach you about beer. And I thought, beer, what are you going to teach me about beer? I've had a Budweiser before. I know what beer tastes like. It's not special. And he kind of sat me down and gave me education and taught me about the complexity of beer and the richness and just the amount of different flavors and different things you can do with beer that you can't do with wine. And he also gave me a very important piece of advice, which is I can make great beer in Florida because all my ingredients ship. I can get barley from Germany and hops from the Czech Republic and whatnot. I can't really make great wine in Florida. The shipping of grape juice and fresh grapes just doesn't work that way. So that intrigued me. And I said, well, I'll give this beer brewing thing a try. I started as a home brewer for about a year or so. And then there was a small little startup that has now become a national brand called Funky Buddha. And I came on as the original head brewer and started that brewery from kind of the ground up and made all the batches of beer for them for almost 4 years before kind of venturing out on my own. So I got an education when the craft beer industry in Florida was in its infancy. I got my foot in the door by just having a skill set that very few other people did, and that was being a home brewer.
That's cool. And so is this your brewery?
I'm one of the partners. Yeah, I have 3 partners in the brewery. I started Barrel of Monks as a partner and the head brewer. I've since passed on those responsibilities. My actual title is Director of Operations. I kind of oversee sales, marketing, tap room. I do oversee the production side of things as well. Kind of sit on my butt and do emails all day. It's really great.
Yeah, in the great Florida weather, right?
Yeah.
Have you been to Montana?
Never, no.
No. All right, that's cool. Well, you'll have to do a visit out here, and we'll do a tasting with you or something.
That's one of my goals. And right now I'm distributing in about 10 states right now between my 2 brands. And I do have a goal to get out to as many as possible because it gives me an excuse to travel. So,
yeah, exactly.
I've heard that it's absolutely beautiful. So I definitely want to get out at some point.
Yeah, it is. It's great. The town we live in has the Missouri River running right through it. It's really a beautiful town, I think, too. So anyway, so anything else you want to talk about as far as the brewery or your background, or should we just jump into tasting some beer?
Well, I'll just give you a quick little background about Barrel of Monks in general. So we're coming up on 7 years old. We specialize in Belgian style ales. So everything we do has European malts and hops, Belgian ale yeast. Now we do some things like IPAs and things that are a little bit out of the traditional Belgian realm, but we still use our proprietary yeast strain for that. So we focus on really making the classic styles with a little bit of an American update, but still really wanting to be dry and drinkable like the great Belgian beers are, not sweet and under attenuated, which a lot of American breweries when they do Belgians are, and really do something special. When you special, I always equate it to like, when you want great Thai food, you tend to go to a Thai restaurant. You don't tend to go to an Italian restaurant for Thai food, right?
Right.
with us, with the Belgian style brewery, is that we specialize in something, so we know we're going to be doing it really, really well. And that's one of the great things about a brewery that does one thing, is that we can focus on it. We can work with Belgian yeast. We can really learn about its ins and outs, which is something that, most breweries do a large swath of things, and we kind of a little more nail focused.
And Belgium doesn't have all the rules like Germany does as far as how they have to make their beers, right? Is that kind of, what is a Belgian style, I guess?
So it's not the Reinheitsgebot is what you're talking about for the German purity laws. But I mean, listen, German breweries don't necessarily follow the Reinheitsgebot. That's just an old school way of thinking. But what really defines a Belgian style beer is the yeast. The yeast that we use is flavorful. A lot of yeast, most yeast, if you go to your location and grab a beer off a shelf, the yeast they're using probably doesn't impart much flavor. It's a workhorse. It turns sugar into alcohol and CO2. Whereas our yeast, we use several different strains depending on the style of beer, and it gives off what's called phenols and esters. Phenols being spicy characteristics, esters being fruity characteristics. So our beer has an extra ingredient, I always say. And depending on how we ferment and how much yeast we pitch, we can manipulate that flavor profile and change the beer. So really, it's using Belgian yeast. It's really understanding how to use Belgian yeast. And then we use a lot of European ingredients, which is just kind of the malts they use, because a Canadian malt versus a German malt, they taste different. It's just like the terroir of grapes. So taking that extra time to let those ingredients take a boat trip really does make a difference.
Yeah, we have a local malt plant here. We grow a lot of barley in our area, and there's a French company built it originally. I don't know who owns it now. I think it's Malt Europe, I think is the name of the company. But yeah, so they came over and they had a bunch of experience with making malt in Europe and built a plant here. So we're a little bit familiar with malts anyway here in Great Falls.
Oh,
anyway, let's get on to sorry, go ahead.
No, please, let's go ahead.
Do you want to go on to the first one?
Let's do it.
Perfect. All right, there it is. Tell us about a single.
So a classic Belgian single is in the same class as a single, double, triple, and quadruple, which are the Abbey style ales. There's not a lot of breweries in the US that make a single, and a single is just the lightest, most approachable of those Trappist styles. Ours is 4.5%. It's clean, it's dry, it's drinkable. It's meant to be our version of a lager, basically, even though it is an ale, it's fermented with an ale yeast. So I always say, when you go to a brewery, have the lightest, simplest thing they make. And if you like that, if it doesn't have off flavors, if it's not throwing off DMS, which is cream corn flavors, diacetyl, which is buttered popcorn flavors, if it's well made and well built, they know how to make beer, and then you can trust all the rest of the beers in their portfolio. So when people come to me, this might not be my most exciting beer, but it's one of the beers I'm most proud of, because there's no off flavors. It's clean, it's dry, it's drinkable, it's approachable for most palates, but it still has a little bit of that fruity ester Belgian character without going over the top. You can drink these while you're watching football. You can drink these at a barbecue, but you can also pour it in a snifter and appreciate it and see some of the complexity within it. And that's why it's a workhorse for us. It's one of our highest selling beers in our tap room, even though it may be, for a lot of craft beer aficionados, one of the least interesting things we do.
Nice. Who does the marketing? I mean, the labels and the design and the names and all that, is that collaborative? Or, I mean, these interesting labels.
So we naming beers is the bane of my existence, because you come up, you'll have a fever dream in the middle of the night, and you'll think you came up with the most esoteric, perfect beer name in the world, and then you'll go on Rate Beer, Beer Advocate, Untapped, and you'll find there's 7 other beers named that. So just because of the sheer volume of breweries, it's tough. But it's a collaborative process. We're 7 years old, so we've developed a lot of these names over time. We have a local company that does all of our branding and our imaging for all of our beers. And it's a collaborative process. It seems like one of the most fun aspects of the job, and it sometimes can be, but it also makes me tear my hair out.
Yeah, I'll bet. It's got to be getting harder and harder. There's so many breweries anymore. It's just crazy. So.
And we have breweries across the country that will use one of our beer names. And if I'm not selling beer in Idaho and there's a brew pub in Idaho with one of my names, I don't want to send them a cease and desist, right? But at the same time, that's a brand that we've had for 7 years, and it's important for us to keep. So it's balancing all that. That's really interesting. And it's really, when you get to the point where you're national and you're in every state, then you really have to start confronting some of those things.
Right. All right, let's move on to Single in Havana. That's a fun name.
So you can tell from my background, that's an
Right.
important bit for us. So the Single in Havana is built off Single in the Sun, if you can't tell by the name. So it is a Belgian single. It's the same basic base beer with some slight differences in the hop bill and some of the other ways we ferment it. But the big thing for this is we add guava. And for those of you who don't know, guava is a tropical fruit. It's very big in Cuba, which the name Single in Havana comes from. My wife is actually of Cuban heritage. She's the first generation American. So in South Florida, the Cuban culture is big, guava is big. So we wanted to do something that had the Belgian flair of being a single and then have a local flair, which is adding the guava fruit to it. And when we started doing this, there wasn't a lot of people who did it. It has went from being a seasonal release to now one of our staples, is our #2 selling beer, period. 4.5%, even though it's fruity and has that tropical fruit flavor, it's bone dry. There is absolutely little to no residual sugar in this beer. And that's important because you want to get the flavor of the fruit without getting all that residual sugar to make it cloying. I'm actually drinking out of a can because we actually have some cans in house, even though you guys have some bottles. But we launched this beer as a year-round package during the pandemic last year. And it's now already almost our #1 selling beer. It's just behind our flagship. So it's really taken off. It's really become something that the more novice beer drinkers will go, oh, I'll try a fruit beer. And I think that the classic people that really love craft beer and appreciate it go, wow, that's a really well-made fruit beer. It's real drinkable. And it's something that I can appreciate.
What would you think food-wise, since you did quite a bit in your restaurant world? What would you put? This seems like an interesting food beer to me.
So the simple things is always to go, hey, do a salad with goat cheese and a strawberry vinaigrette, right? Doing something like that would be real simple. I love this with brie and soft cheeses, goes really, really well together. But there's a good amount of things you can do. I mean, at a 4.5% beer, when you're going power to power with stuff, light chicken dishes go really well. This actually does a good job of cutting through some light cream sauces, shockingly enough, because when you have those basic kind of sauces with cream, having a little fruit in the background to balance that out is nice. So we do a lot of food and beer pairings here. It's one of the things we specialize in. So I'm glad you asked that question because that's a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, that's half the fun of running places like this. We do have a restaurant attached to our downtown store, so we get to do a lot of beer and wine pairings for people, and I think that's a blast. People don't really think about beer as much with pairings as they do wine, or maybe they're starting to, but originally I don't think that was a big thing. So
they're starting to, but part of what we do a beer dinner every other month that is a blind dinner where we go against another brewery to see who pairs the beer the best. And in that, I've actually done beer versus wine. And I'm proud to say that every time we've done a beer versus wine dinner, we've won. Now, I will say that a lot of beer drinkers in that crowd, right? We have a little bit of the home field advantage. But I think people are pleasantly surprised when they see the complexity of what beer can offer. And because of the amount of different ingredients I can use, you're not going to throw orange peel and coriander in a glass of Sauvignon Blanc. But with beer, I can use orange peel and coriander. And I can then put it up against like a nice Thai food that really enhances the spices or cuts through some of the spice. So I always encourage people to go to your local spot, craft beer place, try to pick out some singles, if you guys do something like that.
we do, yeah.
And then go, hey, I'm going to try 4 different triples or 4 different Belgian beers or 4 different IPAs, and I'm going to do it with my dinner and see how they play differently. And it's really, really different. It's really unexpected for a lot of people.
Yeah, IPAs are the tough ones that when I've done beer dinners. I think some of those really hoppy ones are hard to get anything to taste good other than the beer itself. Anyway, we can move on to the next one. It's this one, right? I think. Yep. Excuse me.
Wizard Wit. I'm also drinking a can because I've got them available to me. But Wizard is the beer, the #1 batch in the history of Barrel of Monks was the Wizard Wit. It is, for lack of a better word, the beer that built the brewery. It is our flagship. A good Belgian wit beer is imperative to someone doing Belgian beers. What we really wanted to make sure with this beer is that a lot of American versions of this beer are kind of sweet. And if you've ever had a Blue Moon, which I'm sure most of the people listening to this, watching this have, it's a little sweet. And that's because the American palate tends to like over the top flavors. So if it's a little bit sweet, it's going to be big sweet. If it's going to be an IPA, it's going to be double the hops, extra salt, extra butter, right? When you're cooking. Where the classic style of the Belgian wit is a little bit more nuanced, a little bit cleaner. And I think we've hit that balance here. Coriander and orange peel brewed into this beer, dry, 5.5% alcohol, should be really quaffable, should be able to be paired and drink on a hot summer day, but at the same time, be able to pair with light Thai food, with cheeses, with things that are a little bit more robust.
I was thinking maybe a BLT. We have a great BLT on our menu for lunch here. I think that'd be kind of a fun pairing with that.
I can definitely see that, adding that coriander spice to complement the spices and stuff off the bacon. It also has body enough to cut through some of the fats that are there. This is a beer that for years when people thought of Barrel of Monks, they thought the Wizard. I was the Wizard guy when I showed up to do a tasting. And I'm proud of that because that means that the beer is kind of permeated into the culture and people know it. They know quality when they see Wizard Wit. They know that they're going to get a more authentic take on the taste on a great Belgian wit beer when they try it.
Nice. So tell me about Cuban cuisine just for a second. What are kind of the flavors from that culture?
So one of the things that's misconception of my family, and I'm originally from Michigan, and we don't have a lot of Cuban culture or a lot of Cuban food in Michigan. So everyone thinks it's like really spicy, but there's not a lot of really heat spices in picadillo or ropa vieja or some of the classic Cuban dishes, fricassee. So you have, a lot of flavors of like a lot of onion, a lot of garlic that are like kind of the bases of sauces, a lot of roasted and seared meats, or when you're talking about pork and chicken and things of that nature. So really, really savory, really rich dishes for most of the dishes that we're talking about. I mean, everyone knows the classic Cuban sandwich with your pork, cheese, that little bit of mustard, a lot of savory, big, full flavors in the Cuban cuisine that I'm mostly familiar with.
Yeah, cool. That was a question back for that single in Havana. I was just thinking of it. That'd be fun to maybe go, since they're big into that guava, maybe that'd be fun to pair some Cuban food with that.
The classic American, I don't know if it's an Americanized version or it is a classic Cuban pastry, is the pastelito de guayaba, which is a guava pastry, which is, pureed guava and a nice pastry that's really, really sweet. Sometimes you add cream cheese into it. And that was kind of one of the thoughts we were thinking about when we made that beer, was the breadiness of the malts, the guava flavor, but making it quaffable. So we tried to kind of replicate some of those flavors there.
Nice. I really like that wid. That was a good beer. We have a local brewery here that does coriander and orange peel. It's called Belgian White. It sells really well. So I think this is really fun beer too. So we'll move on, I guess, to just to prove a point. We'll move on.
Yeah. So this was a really special beer for us. We were over 6 years old before we made our first IPA, because in the classic Belgian brewing sense, there's not a lot of IPAs as an Americans. The British style that really was put on the map by the American breweries that just kind of loaded way too many hops. Not anymore, way too many hops, but in the beginning, way too many hops into the beer. And we kind of stayed away from it until we thought we could do it right. Most Belgian IPAs, quote unquote, IPAs brewed with Belgian yeast, have this cough syrupy kind of flavor to them because the citrus of the American hops with the fruitiness of the Belgian yeast is never blended for us. It really was the new hops that came out that were more fruity, that were more estery, that were more complex over the last 5 to 10 years that really have made this beer possible. So this beer is big, dank, fruity. I mean, you get mango and pineapple and passion fruit. That comes from the yeast. It also comes from the hops that we use. This beer was made to celebrate our 6th anniversary. We'd never done a can of beer before, right? Or never done cans before. We'd never done a double IPA before. We decided, well, what's the silliest thing we can do? We can do a double IPA can release for our 6th-year anniversary. Usually our anniversary beers are barrel-aged quads, right? Things of that in a 750 cork and cage bottle. So we decided to go with a really silly label, just to prove a point was the idea of we can do this. We've studied this. We've done our homework, and we think we've made a great IPA that also represents our heritage, which is Belgian style brewing. So it's big, it's chewy. This probably will never be made again, most likely. It is a one-off specialty beer. I hoarded cases of this and portioned out 1 can a day for myself for months. I have like 5 cans left in the brewery, so I just happen to have a few left here so I could try it.
I love the name. I think that is a really fun name.
Yeah, I'm just really proud of the beer. Now, I will say this, this was released several months ago, and IPA should be drank very young, ideally. But at this point, this beer has just become more malty. And that's one of the great things about our beer is that even when the hops start to fade and become more subtle, there's a really nice malt backbone to it. And that's the great thing about Belgian beer in general.
What do you think, Jimmy?
It's delicious.
Yeah, I think it's really nice too. We got Jimmy here from George's too.
Hi, Gavin.
He's our local rep for George's Distributing.
Cool. Well,
All right, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, we also, I'm not sure if George's will pick it up, but I've got a pineapple IPA that's getting canned next week. And that will be in this new IPA series we're doing. So you might be seeing something like that in the near future. Who knows?
Yeah, we still sell a ton of IPAs. It's definitely the biggest selling category for us. I mean, we have all the, Trappist beers and all kinds of stuff. We sell a lot, but IPAs are still #1 out here in Montana. I know that's kind of changing a little bit across America, right? Don't you see, or at least less hoppy IPAs are heading that way?
You're seeing a lot of session or low calorie IPAs come out.
Yeah.
It's the straw that stirs the drink, man. It's what people know. You still have craft beer drinkers that think every craft beer is an IPA. They'll come in and go, what kind of IPA do you got? Well, I've only got one IPA. But what about that? Quadruple. What kind of IPA is that? I mean, we hear that all the time. So I think it's kind of permeated the culture to the point where it's kind of with us, it's ingrained. And I think these different iterations of the same style will continue to kind of cycle through. But listen, we're hoping for the return of malt forward, big, rich beers, because that's another big thing that we have in our portfolio. And speaking of which, the next beer.
Yes, exactly. We have Mocha Quadruple, right? Quadruple,
yes.
Quadruple, right? I'm gonna have to give in and give readers one of these days pretty soon. I can't really read as much as I used to be able to.
So the quadruple is on the opposite side of the spectrum of the single, right? Single, double, triple, quadruple. The quadruple is the biggest Trappist beer. Dark strong ale, almost always over 10%. Big, rich, you usually get a lot of chocolate. You get a lot of fruity flavors like dark fruit, blackberry, cherries, black cherry. That's a lot of the flavor profile of beers like this, a little bit of roastiness sometimes. And we have a classic quad that we've been making since day one called Quadraphonic. This is a playoff of that beer with a lot of cocoa nibs, a little vanilla bean, and some local roasted coffee. And we thought the flavors meshed really well together. We got that big 10% beer. You've got the backbone of the roast that you get from the cocoa nibs, a little bit of sweetness from the vanilla. At this point, you're getting a lot of the coffee coming forward with some of the dry cocoa nib flavor in the background. And that's kind of how the beer develops over time, which is really interesting. It was a little more chocolate forward the day it was made, right? Or the day it was canned. But that's another great thing about Belgian yeast and about these kind of big beers is that they develop over time. I've got beers in my portfolio at my brewery that we sell that are 5 years old. We have a vintage bottle list. And you can buy a 5-year-old quad or a 3-year-old triple and see how they change over time. And this beer is really, changed and developed into something really nice, integrated, mellow with some of those big flavors coming out, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I think flourless chocolate tart maybe would be a good pairing here to kind of marry the two flavors together, right?
I think that would be great. I also think I would use this with a big, I don't know if you've ever done like a coffee rub sirloin.
Oh, yeah.
You could do something with a steak and even just do it with, my favorite steak seasoning, brown sugar, salt, and pepper. Boom, that's it. Sear that thing, get it nice and crispy, and you throw this on top of it with a little bit of that sweetness from the chocolate, roastiness from the cocoa nib. That could be a really nice little pairing.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Well, that was fun. Thank you very much. I always like to ask whoever we're talking to, if you don't drink beer, what else? What's your favorite drink other than that? Is it still wine, or you got a cocktail you love? Or
You know, I know so little about wine at this point. I used to know everything about Italian wine, and when you fall out of practice, I don't really know. I enjoy drinking wine when I have a chance. I'm a tequila guy,
Mm.
so good craft tequila. That's what I like to sip when I'm not drinking beer. That's my favorite. I also enjoy a good old fashioned. So
Yeah.
whiskey, tequila. I love to drink my beer. I love to drink new beers from other breweries that I haven't tried yet. I have friends all over the country that send me stuff all the time, and that's a really fun thing as well.
We did Tampa, I think it was Cigar City. Is that right? Brewery. Are you familiar with them?
Oh, I mean, I've known the Cigar City guys since it was only two people on the payroll. Yeah,
Yeah.
great brewery. Their Southeast regional manager for sales is a close personal friend of mine. I've known him for years, and I love those guys. They make great beer, and they do it right as far as a brewery that grew but still kept the quality and the commitment to make great beer.
Yeah, we had fun with them for sure, and love their beers. Well, I think that'll do it. Thank you for your time. I know you're a busy guy, and thanks for taking a little time out of the Florida sun to hang out with us. So I'm sure we'll talk again. Hopefully, you can make it to Montana. We'll get you on the river fishing, or we'll take you down a ski hill or something. So get up
Well,
here and see us.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much for including me and asking me to be on. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks very much.
All right, you're welcome. Bye.
Bye.